Good morning, friends. Understanding that their superiors were taking precautions for self-protection, some of the rank-and-file interrogators, not however those who drank like maniacs, tried to start off with milder methods, and even when they intensified them, they tried to avoid those that left obvious marks: an eye gouged out, an ear torn off, a backbone broken, even bruises all over the body. That is why in 1937 we observe no general consistency of methods, except for enforced sleeplessness, in the administrations of the various provinces, or for that matter among the different interrogators of a single administration. What they did have in common, however, was that they gave precedence to the so-called light methods. We will see what they were immediately. This way was sure. Indeed, the actual boundaries of human equilibrium are very narrow, and it is not really necessary to use a rack or hot coals to drive the average human being out of his mind. Let us try to list some of the simplest methods which break the will and the character of the prisoner without leaving marks on his body. Let us begin with psychological methods. These methods have enormous and even annihilating impact on rabbits who have never been prepared for prison suffering, and it isn't easy even for a person who holds strong convictions. One, first of all, night. Why is it that all the main work of breaking down human souls went on at night? Why, from the very earliest years did the organs select the night? Because at night, the prisoner, torn from sleep, even though he has not yet been tortured by sleeplessness, lacks his normal daytime equanimity and common sense. He is more vulnerable. 2. Persuasion. In a sincere tone is the very simplest. Persuasion in a sincere tone is the very simplest method. Why play cat and mouse, so to speak? After all, having spent some time among others undergoing interrogation, the prisoner has come to see what the situation is, and so the interrogator says to him in a lazily friendly way, "Look, you're going to get a prison term whatever happens, but if you resist, you'll croak right here in prison. You'll lose your health. But if you go to camp, you'll have fresh air and sunlight, so why not sign right now?" Very logical. And those who agree and sign are smart, if the matter concerns only themselves, but that's rarely so. A struggle is inevitable. Another variant of persuasion is particularly appropriate to the party member. If there are shortages and even famine in the country, then you, as a Bolshevist, have to make up your mind. Can you admit that the whole party is to blame, or the whole Soviet government? No, of course not. The director of the Flax Depot hastened to reply, "Then be brave and shoulder the blame yourself." And he did. 3. Foul language is not a clever method, but it can have a powerful impact on people who are well brought up, refined, and delicate. I know of 2 cases involving priests who capitulated to foul language alone. One of them, in the Butriki in 1944, was being interrogated by a woman. At first, when he'd come back to our cell, he couldn't say often enough how polite she was, but once he came back very despondent, and for a long time he refused to tell us how, with her legs crossed high, she had begun to curse. I regret that I cannot cite one of her little phrases here. Psychological contrast. Number 4. Psychological contrast was sometimes effective. Sudden reversals of tone, for example. For a whole or part of the interrogation period, the interrogator would be extremely friendly, addressing the prisoner formally by the first name and patronymic and promising everything. Suddenly he would brandish a paperweight and shout, "Phoo, you rat! I'll put 9 grams of lead in your skull." And you would advance on the accused, clutching hands outstretched, as if to grab him by the hair, fingernails like needles. This worked very, very well with women prisoners. Or, as a variation on this, 2 interrogators would take turns. One would shout and bully, the other would be friendly, almost gentle. Each time the accused entered the office, he would tremble. Which would it be? He wanted to do everything to please the gentle one because of his different manner, even to the point of signing and confessing to things that had never happened. 5. Preliminary humiliation was another approach. In the famous cells of the Rostov-on-the-Don, GPU, House 33, which were lit by lens-like insets of thick glass in the sidewalk above the former storage basement, prisoners awaiting interrogation were made to lie face down for several hours in the main corridor, and forbidden to raise their heads or make a sound. They lay this way, like Muslims at prayer, until a guard touched a shoulder and took them off to interrogation. Another case, at the Lubyanka, Aleksandr O. V.A. Va refused to give the testimony demanded of her. Refused to give the testimony demanded of her. She was transferred to Lefortovo. In the admitting office, a woman jailer ordered her to undress, allegedly for a medical examination, took away her clothes, and locked her in a box naked. At that point, the men jailers began to peer through the peephole and to appraise her female attributes with loud laughs. If one were systematically to question former prisoners, many more such examples would certainly emerge. They all had but a single purpose, to dishearten and humiliate. 6. Any method of inducing extreme confusion in the accused might be employed. Here is how FIV from Krasnogorsk, Moscow province, was interrogated. This was reported by IAP. During the interrogation, the interrogator, a woman, undressed in front of him by stages, a striptease, all the time continuing the interrogation as if nothing were going on. She walked about the room and came close to him and tried to get him to give in. Perhaps this satisfied some personal quirk in her, but it may also have been cold-blooded calculation, an attempt to get the accused so muddled that he would sign. She was in no danger. She had her pistol, and she had her alarm bell. 7. Intimidation was very widely used and very varied. It was often accompanied by enticement and by promises which were, of course, false. In 1924, if you don't confess, you'll have to go to Solovetsky Islands. Anybody who confesses is turned loose. In 1944, which camp you'll be sent to depends on us. Camps are different. You'll get hard labor camps now. We've got hard labor camps now. If you confess, you'll go to an easy camp. If you're stubborn, you'll get 25 years in handcuffs in the mines. Another form of intimidation was threatening a prisoner with a prison worse than the one he was in. If you keep on being stubborn, we'll send you to Lefortovo, if you were in the Lubyanka, to Sukhanovka, if you were in Lefortovo. They'll find another way to talk to you there. You have already gotten used to things where you are. The regimen seems to be not so bad, and what kind of torments await you elsewhere? Yes, and you also have to be transported there. Should you give in? Intimidation worked beautifully on those who had not yet to prove their innocence when falsely accused. How can we there? We were even glad when we succeeded in taking all the guilt on our own shoulders. Sorry, friends. I skipped a page. Intimidation worked beautifully on those who had not yet been arrested, but had simply received an official summons to the Bolshy Dom, the big house. He or she still had a lot to lose. He or she was frightened of everything. That they wouldn't let him or her out today, that they would confiscate their belongings or apartment. He would be ready to give all kinds of testimony and make all kinds of concessions in order to avoid these dangers. She, of course, would be ignorant of the criminal code, and at the very least, at the start of the questioning, they would push a sheet of paper in front of her with a fake citation from the code. I've been warned that for giving false testimony, 5 years of imprisonment. In actual fact, under Article 95, it is 2 years. For refusal to give testimony, 5 months. Here, then, one more of the interrogator's basic methods has entered the picture and will continue to re-enter it. 8. The lie. We lambs were forbidden to lie, but the interrogator could tell all the lies he felt like. Those articles of the law did not apply to him. He had even lost the yardstick with which to gauge. What does he get for lying? He could confront us with as many documents as he chose, bearing the forged signatures of our kinfolk and friends, and it would be just a skillful interrogation technique. Intimidation through enticement and lies was the fundamental method for bringing pressure on the relatives of the arrested person when they were called in to give testimony. If you don't tell us such and such, whatever was being asked, it's going to be the worse for him. You'll be destroying him completely. How hard for a mother to hear that. Signing this paper, pushed in front of the relatives, is the only way you can save him, destroy him. 9. Playing on one's affection for those one loved was a game that worked beautifully on the accused as well. It was the most effective of all methods of intimidation. One could break even a totally fearless person through his concern for those he loved. Oh, how foresighted was this saying, "A man's family are his enemies." Remember the tater who bore his sufferings, his own and those of his wife, but could not endure his daughters. In 1930, Ramalis, a woman interrogator, used to threaten, "We'll arrest your daughter and lock her in a cell with syphilitics." And that was a woman. They would threaten to arrest everyone you loved. Sometimes this would be done with sound effects. "Your wife has already been arrested, but her further fate depends on you. They're questioning her in the next room. Just listen." And through the wall you can actually hear a woman weeping and screaming. After all, they all sound alike. You're hearing it through a wall, and you're under terrific strain and not in a state to play the expert on voice identification. Sometimes they simply play a recording of the voice of a typical wife, soprano or contralto, a labor-saving device suggested by some inventive genius. And then, without fakery, they actually show her to you through a glass door, as she walks along in silence, her head bent in grief. Yes, your own wife in the corridors of state security. You have destroyed her by your stubbornness. She has already been arrested. In actual fact, she has simply been summoned in connection with some insignificant procedural question and sent into the corridor at just the right moment, after being told, "Don't raise your head or you'll be kept here." Or they give you a letter to read, and the handwriting is exactly like hers. "I renounce you. After the filth they have told me about you, I don't need you any more." And since such wives do exist in our country, and such letters as well, you are left to ponder in your heart, is that the kind of wife she really is? The interrogator Goldman in 1944 was trying to extort testimony against other people from V.A. Korneyeva, with the threat, "We'll confiscate your house and toss your old woman into the street." The woman of deep convictions and firm in her faith, Korneyeva had no fear whatsoever for herself. She was prepared to suffer, but given our laws, Goldman's threats were all too real, and she was in torment over the fate of her loved ones. When by morning, after a night of tearing up rejected depositions, Goldman began to write a fourth version accusing Korneyeva alone, she signed it happily and with a feeling of spiritual victory. We failed to hang on to the basic human instinct to prove our innocence when falsely accused. How can we there? We were even glad when we succeeded in taking all the guilt on our own shoulders. Just as there is no classification in nature with rigid boundaries, it is impossible rigidly to separate psychological methods from physical ones. Where, for example, should we classify the following amusement? 10. Sound effects. The accused is made to stand 20 to 25 feet away and is then forced to speak more and more loudly and to repeat everything. This is not easy for someone already weakened to the point of exhaustion. Or 2 megaphones are constructed of rolled-up cardboard, and 2 interrogators coming close to the prisoner bellow in both ears, "Confess, you rat!" The prisoner is deafened. Sometimes he actually loses his sense of hearing. But this method is uneconomical. The fact is the interrogators like some diversion in their monotonous work, and so they vie in thinking up new ideas. 11. Tickling. This is also a diversion. The prisoner's arms and legs are bound and held together, and then the inside of his nose is tickled with a feather. The prisoner writhes. It feels as though someone is drilling into his brain. 12. A cigarette is put out on the accused's skin, already mentioned above. 13. Light effects. Involve the use of an extremely bright electric light in the small white-walled cell or box in which the accused is being held, a light which is never extinguished. The electricity saved by the economies of schoolchildren and housewives. Your eyelids become inflamed, which is very painful, and then in the interrogation room searchlights are again directed into your eyes. 14. Here is another imaginative trick. On the eve of May 1, 1933, in the Khabarovsk GPU for 12 hours all night, Chebataryev was not interrogated, no, but was simply kept in a continual state of being led to interrogation. "Hey, you! Hands behind your back!" They led him out of the cell, up the stairs quickly into the interrogator's office. The guard left. But the interrogator, without asking one single question, and sometimes without even allowing Chebataryev to sit down, would pick up the telephone, take away the prisoner from 107. And so they came to get him, and took him back to his cell. No sooner had he lain down on his board bunk than the lock rattled. Chebataryev, to interrogation, hands behind your back. When he got there, take away the prisoner from 107. For that matter, the methods of bringing pressure to bear can begin a long time before the interrogator's office. That's all for today, friends. Have a good day.